Yeah, so thank you for the introduction. So I'm Nick Baguley, Vice President of Data Science at Finicity and MasterCard. So just to go a little bit further into myself, first, great to be here at DeveloperWeek. Really excited to have everybody here in attendance and just in general for the invitation to speak. So in my background, so I started in the big data and data science space about 10 years ago, a little bit over 10 years ago now. And at that point, data science was really in its nascency. The general term had not really been coined so far, and overall, as an industry, we were really trying to decide what data science could really do to apply to the things that we were doing as in each of our respective businesses. So for me, I was working with Mitel and Sun Microsystems, and we were really starting to design some of the first areas of what we called presence at the time that would take your telecommunications, whether that was a PBX or other software, and thin clients from Sun Microsystems, and really try to find a way to be able to take a video conference and transfer that to your thin client or back to your phone automatically, and to be able to tie all of that to your identity, whether that was a security card or some other form of authorization at the time. 10 years ago, we hit up into all sorts of constraints around making this a reality, but the biggest at the time was really just access to big data. And so we started looking into many different technologies, and I got pretty heavily involved in Hadoop and started one of the first Hadoop users groups here in the country. It was called UHUG at the time. In fact, they were all called HUG, and if you knew about big data, you were probably connected into a HUG somewhere around the country. So we grew that group to be one of the largest in the U.S. And eventually I was invited to come back and work with the White House under the Obama administration with DJ Patil, who was the first chief data scientist of the country, and was actually the individual that coined the term data science, or one of the individuals that coined it, at least for this generation. We can see it spoken about previously before that as well. And so as part of that, we created, out of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, we created the National Data Science Organizers, and eventually the big data hubs that still exist today and focus on national priorities. So then I started working into different industries and across all sectors, and I've covered everything from the federal and state and local government space to steering committees, boards, have started up multiple companies, and worked in academia, as well as in the nonprofit side. And on the nonprofit side, we've created conferences and training material and other things to really try to understand how do we take these concepts of big data and data science and start applying them to people from all walks of life and create opportunities for others. I tell you all of that because for me, really my passion is solving for potential. So creating opportunities for individuals, for companies, really for people around the world to be able to really achieve their potential and to be able to find success. So today, I'm at Finicity and now focusing very much in the finance space. So we focus right now on the next generation of data. It's really about data access tied to open banking and AI in financial services. And this is really the major reason why MasterCard has come in and acquired Finicity. It's because open banking creates the opportunity for us to have access on behalf of a consumer to financial data that will allow them to have many other financial services available that they wouldn't have had previously. So some of those areas, as we think about this expansion of data, have created new opportunities for us in big business and really even in an international and then all the way down to a hyper-personalized scale. We're seeing data mining, data insights, data analytics, and data intelligence techniques start to create opportunities for increasing financial literacy, for transforming digital underwriting and other things that help us understand, like, how do we actually give access to somebody to credit or some other financial instrument, to expanding financial inclusion. Many of us have heard the term or heard the phrase, you have to have credit in order to receive credit. This becomes very apparent if you move to a different country, or the very first time that you apply for a loan or a credit card or something to try to get beyond your day-to-day or month-to-month paycheck. You arrive, and at the very first time, if you don't have somebody that will actually help you get access to that loan, typically you just cannot get access to it. And part of that overall structuring of the scoring space really for us meant that we needed to create an opportunity for positive attribution, create access to the financial account on behalf of the consumer, where the consumer says, look, I will permission access to my financial data. And now we and fintechs and financial institutions can look at that data and understand economic behaviors, positive behaviors, things like paying utilities and bills on time, showing that you are financially responsible. And now you can get access to that same financial instrument that before previously really wouldn't have been possible. So we focus on a few different areas. So the scoring and the decisioning space. We focus on, so in scoring, we have Experian Boost is a product that we partner with Experian on. We've worked on Ultra FICO. And in the decisioning space, we've worked with companies like Quicken Loans and Rocket Mortgage and many other spaces that have helped give access to consumer permission data that helps them be able to achieve something amazing. In the fintech space, we've enabled many different apps and many different services that developers are creating, which is part of what's so exciting about speaking to the crowd today. When we think about creating a new app or a new opportunity for an individual, or we look at some of the business models that have changed the world and the landscape over the last 5 to 10 years, we find that many of these services really don't exist without data and data science behind them. And so having access to that as you're developing and creating your platforms really creates an immense opportunity, right? So if we really at this point start thinking about flipping the paradigms or how things existed yesterday in the experience or 10 years ago, really that Silicon Valley experience in data, to a new reality that allows the consumers, really all of us, to be able to be the originators of the data, to be able to use that data, control the data, understand the data, and most importantly, benefit from that data. So as a company, we architect solutions that provide access to that data and provide utilities for you like direct APIs and data feeds and different information that allow you to build that directly into your app and to be able to build something amazing on top of that that's very specific for the consumers that you serve. We provide an analytics and a data science layer that goes in and provides attributes and cleansing and many other things like categorization and entity recognition and resolution, scoring, verifications, many other services that I'll come back to later. And all of these are then made available through developer tools like APIs and SDKs, provide a better user experience so that the consumers make it through that flow and are able to permission and understand the use of their data. And then we get into different types of integrations where we can help loan originators or risk portfolios or into the point of sale systems so that we can provide access to this data and to these services, to the loyalty programs, to the many other things that the companies out there are creating today at that point in time to make for the best possible customer experience. All of these financial services and solutions, the applications overall, create those opportunities in those areas they talked about before, really lending and investments, payments, and financial management. When we think about empowering the consumer, again, I think it's really good to go in and consider what we're doing on the software development side and then take that all the way out to a use case. So if I, as an individual in the past, wanted to have access to my finances to be able to know and understand what's going on with my account, it really wasn't possible a little bit over 20 years ago. It was very, very difficult to do. About 10 years ago, it would be incredibly difficult to, at the point of sale, provide information that helps me potentially get access to credit while I'm purchasing and trying to actually transact. Now, as we start looking at decisioning and lending use cases, going from scoring and methodologies that were really designed to be pass-facing and in some ways a little bit punitive, to now looking into the future and being able to predict and understand what the behavior of the consumer is going to be and what it's going to look like, really does create amazing opportunities. Now, if we think about this new reality, imagine the experiences that you will create when you have the right data, when it comes from the right sources, when the consumers are permissioning it directly and are understanding what the privacy and traceability and how they're authorizing those accounts can be made. It really is incredible, and it's opening up so many things in the world. As we talked about at the very beginning, this is a new generation of data. So as we think through each of these pieces, we need to be considering the different regulations that govern these. So within our space, there are multiple regulations that you would want to consider. So privacy is a good place to start. So when a consumer is providing access to their financial accounts, of course, we want to make sure that that data is secure, as secure as possible, that it's only used for the use case that they want it to be. And regulations like GDPR with PSD2 or CCPA and many other new regulations here in the United States, or even the amendments to those, like CPRA out of California as well, are starting to define beyond just personally identifiable information down to personal information that help us understand more about how critical this data is, and help us understand that for a consumer, it can be very uncomfortable, even if that data can be indirectly associated back with them and with their household. And there are a lot of potentially harmful things that can happen there as well. This leads to some other regulations like the Fairness in Lending Act, when we consider things like predatory lending practices, or other ways that you can use financial data that they're not actually beneficial for the consumer when it really truly is their data. Another one that really governs Finicity is the FCRA. So we are a consumer reporting agency. And as part of that, we actually provide CRA protection for the apps and the technologies that use our software and that use our data access layers. So with this, we have a lot of direct data agreements with different financial institutions, with other groups like payroll providers that you can use to build on top of the software. All of this is very proven, it's tested. And when we get into the data science and intelligence space, that's really my area of focus, and an area I want to dive a little bit deeper into right now. So for us as a developer, when you're coming in and you're accessing these services, oftentimes the data can be a bit obtuse. It can be really difficult to work with. It can be hard as you look at financial data to understand what's important and what it is that's going to apply directly to your app or to the use case that you're trying to solve for your end consumer. And so part of what we do is we go through and we process that data to be able to find attributes and to be able to get into very specific information that can help you with the decisions that you need that consumer to be able to work with and provide. So when we think about specifics within our space, one major area is cash flow. So if I am looking at financial data and I want to understand as a developer, the inflows and outflows of the consumers, what sources of income or revenue does that consumer or that business have access today? How regular is that, and what does that look like from the gig economy perspective, or from other ways that I want to understand how financially healthful is this individual or is this business? Getting in and understanding the balances, other information that can be provided on an application that allows somebody to have access to a mortgage or to an auto loan or to finance management within their system, or again, loyalty programs, or other opportunities for you to enable things like payments and ACH, many, many other opportunities within the core applications that you're creating. For Finicity, there are specific product suites, things like verification of income, verification of assets. We create attribute families that go into the expenses and the other sources of revenue and other information that would be beneficial for you as well, even into things like liabilities and the loans, and helping you really get a full picture that again can help you enable something that the consumer is looking for in their lives and create a very, very powerful application. If you look at many of the fintechs and other groups today, almost all of them are tied in some way back to us or one of our direct competitors. And it's a very, very narrow space, and there's just a ton of amazing opportunities. So to get a little bit more technical here, as we think about the technologies and really data science, one of the processes that I talk about with the team or any teams is called awesome. And it's to obtain the data, to scrub that data, to explore the data, or even the engineering side of that as well. Then it's the machine learning and the modeling, or the deep learning. And then finally, it's in interpretation. So it's OSEMN, and we just dropped the I off of there as well. So when we get beyond interpretation and validation, we know and understand that this particular model is going to be performant. We need to understand how to put it into production. So in our ecosystem, we work with Docker and Kubernetes. We work in the cloud, and we provide access to this data at very large scales. Oftentimes there are billions of transactions that go through our system for particular use cases, but on a monthly basis, we see a billion different data points, significantly more often than not. And so when you think about putting that into a Kubernetes environment, as an example, it can be very, very difficult to be able to use traditional design patterns to be able to surface that model and the underlying representations that are behind it. So in a machine learning or deep learning model, we first need to be able to help the machine understand the types of data and data sources that we're providing. Obviously, as developers, we all know that it eventually all ends up down at binary, but when we pull it up beyond those bits and bytes, get it up a little bit further beyond compression and start pulling it up into the different types, we eventually start changing the data, potentially the performance, the accessibility, and the way that it works within different libraries and frameworks. And so there are core technologies out there that are expanding today to help us with encoding and embedding techniques, different ways to represent that data or the tokens within that data so that we can understand text and be able to do natural language processing or natural language understanding, so that we can get into image and video and audio, so that we can use it in our case for things like KYC and fraud analytics, where we can get in and understand employment from a paycheck or a pay stub or another form of image or PDF. All of this information, once we've processed it and essentially enumerated it and created an integer or a float value of that, all of that information can then be stored as parameters that can be accessed and retrieved by a model that then forms a function that says, I am going to do this. I'm going to search. I'm going to find entities. I'm going to recognize and resolve those entities to make sure that they actually match. So today, Google and others are really moving to state-of-the-art models that provide attention mechanisms and other ways to look at not just how do I process and understand or remember this information like we used to create with LSTMs, with long short-term memory, but into attention that can say, actually, if I can just have enough parameters, then attention, according to Google, is all you need, right? So they've created BERT that has been outperforming a huge amount of other models out there and other state-of-the-art type methodologies. We now have GPT-3 and many other models that are much, much larger. So GPT-3 is about 125 billion parameters in comparison to something like BERT that was considered incredibly large. That might be 100 to maybe even 125 million parameters. So a significant order of magnitude larger. So as we think about storing that, we start getting into really, really large data sets. So we need to consider new design patterns. So if you haven't already check out BERT as a service, and using that same general pattern, but making it a little bit more extensible. The same developers with Hugging Face on GitHub and others have now made an open source library called Jina, Jina, So if you go and look into Gina AI, you'll find more information about it. And Gina AI takes those representations, those huge parameters that say, how do I understand the words smarter data does more? Or how do I understand the information that is contained inside of a transaction and a description in a memo, and make it possible for a model to be able to perform a function on top of that at a very fast speed in a productionized environment. And what they've done is they've created a serving layer and really a client that allows you to be able to access that, as well as the frameworks like TensorFlow or PyTorch or others behind the scenes, without having to host and keep all of that information directly. If you look at GenSim and others, they've also provided new APIs and new access for this information, so that you're not going out and storing all of this information or keeping it in memory in a way that's going to make it almost impossible to have an event stream or get into, again, a small Kubernetes environment or even a larger environment without causing your costs and that overall scale really to function in a way that's not going to work overall. So a few other things that I want to touch on from the tech side. So really, if you're relatively new to data science and you're picking up Python, go out, obviously check out Pandas and NumPy. Dive very, very deep into those. And there's some new open source libraries like Numba and Dask that build on top of those and go into much faster versions. Or when we think about just accessing the data in general, there are many tools like within TensorFlow, they have gfile, or as you go into the depths of Pandas, you'll find out that underneath, you really get into something Google created a long time ago called abstract base classes. And then above that, you get into Python typing. Look at the details of these, and regardless of the level that you're at in your career at this stage, dive deep into the libraries that you're using. Find time to go and understand more about how they work, how you can improve them, and how it works in your overall system. Access data that comes from sources that are reliable, from sources that are going to create true value for your end consumers, and then get into technologies and other solutions that are going to help you really move into the future. So I mentioned that I'd come back and talk a little bit more about the services. So for us, we have different data access methods, and I'll kind of wrap up here. With these data access methods, an OAuth connection, we are directly providing access where the consumer is able to go through a workflow, provide tokenized access, and then connect directly to their financial institutions. Many of the financial institutions are still transferring to this general approach. And so we still have a structured methodology that provides a credentialed access, where we'd go through 2FA and MFA and other best practices from AAA, really authorization, all the way from authentication to authorization and beyond to accessibility and being able to track that information. And then finally, there are plenty of groups out there that are still providing a web scraping type functionality as well to provide access to that data. As it mentions, as you go across here, you really want to make sure that it's as clean a data source as possible. But as you do that, you should be able to develop some really incredible things on top as well. So for now, thank you, everyone. And I'll wrap up there and see if anybody has any questions. You can type them in the chat as well. So. Oh, I do see a question on specific courses that I would suggest taking. So definitely within like Coursera and others, but I would also go out and spend a lot of time on Kaggle and work on competitions. Check out Papers with Code and their state-of-the-art options, and then you can see paperswithcode.com. And each of those will really help you see who's working on the latest and greatest out there and how to be able to implement that code as well. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have I used Rust language, and would you recommend it for use within Finicity? So I've started diving into Rust as well as other paradigms in general. functional programming and other things as well. And I do see a lot of opportunities with each of those, so should be excellent. And my LinkedIn should be Nick Baguley. So I will post that here in just a second. And then let me know if there's any other questions or ways that I can help. Thank you.